The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the judge leaned back, smirking at the absurdity before him. A seasoned defense attorney chuckled, shaking his head, while the accused sat confidently, arms crossed, as if victory was already his. Then, the doors swung open, and a police officer stepped forward, holding the leash of an intense-looking K9. A few scoffs echoed in the chamber. After all, what could a mere dog prove in a case this complex? But the laughter faded the moment the K9 locked eyes on the accused. Within seconds, the once calm defendant shifted uncomfortably. The dog circled, nostrils flaring, tail stiff, then stopped, growling low and deep. The judge's smirk wavered. The air thickened with tension as the officer gave the command. In an instant, the K9 lunged, not at the accused, but at a seemingly innocent bystander in the gallery. Gasps filled the room. The man turned pale, backing away, but it was too late. The K9 had sniffed out the chilling truth, evidence no one had considered. And just like that, what started as a joke became a courtroom revelation that no one would ever forget. What had the K9 uncovered? The truth was far more terrifying than anyone imagined. The case at hand seemed straightforward. At least, that's what everyone in the courtroom thought. The accused, a wealthy businessman named Richard Langley, had been charged with orchestrating a high-profile robbery that left an entire city on edge. The prosecution had evidence, security footage, suspicious financial transactions, and a web of connections leading directly to Langley. But there was one problem. Every piece of evidence was circumstantial. The defense was confident, arguing that there was no direct proof linking Langley to the crime. The judge, a no-nonsense man with decades of experience, had already seen his fair share of high-profile trials and was growing impatient with what he considered a weak case. Then came the wild card, the police's final attempt to tip the scales. A K9 unit had been brought in, specifically a highly trained German shepherd named Rex, known for his uncanny ability to detect the subtlest traces of criminal activity. It was an unusual move. While K9s were often used in field investigations, bringing one into the courtroom was almost unheard of. The defense scoffed at the notion, calling it a theatrical stunt designed to sway the jury through spectacle rather than facts. The judge, finding amusement in the idea, allowed it, but with a skeptical smirk. Langley himself appeared unbothered. He sat with a smug expression, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, as if he had already won. The courtroom audience, filled with journalists, legal analysts, and spectators, leaned in with curiosity. Was this some last-ditch effort by the prosecution, or did they truly believe that a dog could change the course of a trial? What no one realized was that this K9 had been trained for years in identifying more than just drugs or explosives. Rex specialized in human scent detection, capable of picking up fear, deception, and, most importantly, traces of guilt. As the officer leading Rex walked into the courtroom, the tension thickened. The dog's ears perked up, his muscles tensed, and his eyes locked onto someone unexpected. This wasn't just a gimmick. This was about to change everything. The moment Rex entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the crowd. The trained German shepherd moved with precision, his handler keeping a firm grip on the leash. The judge, still amused by the spectacle, leaned forward slightly, his smirk lingering. "Let's get this over with," he said, tapping his gavel lightly. The defense attorney, a seasoned professional named Jonathan Reeves, stood up, arms crossed. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Are we really allowing a dog to determine the fate of a man?" The prosecutor, Emily Carter, remained unfazed. "This K9 has a record of uncovering hidden evidence in over a dozen cases, Your Honor. Let's allow him to do his job." The judge sighed and waved his hand. "Proceed." Rex was led toward the defendant's table. Langley, still smug, gave a dismissive chuckle. But the moment Rex got closer, his demeanor shifted. The dog's body stiffened. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, his tail lowering, a sign of intense focus. Then, without warning, Rex let out a low, guttural growl. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Langley's confident expression flickered for the first time. His hand twitched slightly as he adjusted his tie. The handler gave a command, and Rex immediately pivoted toward a leather briefcase sitting beside Langley's chair. The businessman's face drained of color. The dog circled the briefcase, sniffing along its edges before sitting down in front of it, a signal that he had detected something suspicious. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Langley, is that your briefcase?" Langley hesitated for a fraction of a second before forcing a chuckle. "Of course, Your Honor. Just business documents. Nothing more." Emily Carter wasn't buying it. "Your Honor, I request an immediate inspection of the contents." Reeves jumped up. "Objection. This is absurd. A dog growling doesn't constitute probable cause." Before the judge could respond, Rex suddenly turned his attention back to Langley. This time, his growl deepened, his teeth slightly bared. The businessman shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Then, the judge spoke, his voice unusually serious. "Mr. Langley, if you have nothing to hide, you won't mind opening that briefcase right now?" The entire courtroom held its breath. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. All eyes were on Langley, who sat frozen in his chair, his fingers gripping the edges of his briefcase. A single bead of sweat trailed down his temple. The judge's voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Langley, open the briefcase." Langley forced a laugh, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. You're letting a dog dictate court proceedings." The prosecutor, Emily Carter, leaned forward. "Then prove us wrong, Mr. Langley. Open it." Jonathan Reeves, Langley's attorney, quickly intervened. "Your Honor, my client has the right to refuse an unlawful search. A police dog's suspicion isn't enough evidence to warrant an invasion of privacy." The judge considered for a moment, but then Rex let out a sharp bark, his eyes locked on Langley like a predator cornering its prey. The reaction was immediate. Langley flinched. The courtroom noticed. The judge noticed. Then, in a calm but chilling voice, the judge said, "Bailiff, retrieve the briefcase." Langley shot up. "You can't do that," he barked, but the bailiff was already moving. The moment the briefcase was pulled away from his chair, Langley lunged forward, but Rex moved faster. The canine sprang into action, his handler holding the leash just enough to keep him controlled but alert. Langley stumbled back as Rex bared his teeth, his deep growl reverberating through the room. "Sit down, Mr. Langley," the judge ordered. Langley hesitated before sinking back into his chair, his face pale. The bailiff placed the briefcase on the table. Emily Carter approached cautiously, slipping on gloves before unclasping the lock. With a steady hand, she lifted the lid. Gasps erupted. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Inside, nestled between legal documents and a false bottom, was a stack of unmarked envelopes, thick, stuffed with cash. But that wasn't the real shock. Beside the money, carefully wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a small USB drive. Emily turned to Langley, her eyes burning with accusation. "Would you like to explain this, Mr. Langley?" Langley's mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands twitched, as if scrambling for an excuse. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Bailiff, take that into evidence immediately." As the bailiff carefully removed the contents, the prosecutor continued, "This USB was found in your possession hidden. Let's see what's on it, shall we?" A technician was called forward. The USB was plugged into a laptop. The screen flickered to life, and within moments, encrypted files loaded. The courtroom fell into eerie silence as the first video played. A shadowy figure, Langley, was caught on hidden surveillance, exchanging wads of cash with another man. The video had timestamps, voice recordings, and details of a bribery scandal so damning it would not only expose Langley, but implicate several high-profile figures. The weight of the revelation crashed down like a tidal wave. Langley slumped in his chair, his face ashen. He had been caught. And the one who had exposed him wasn't a lawyer, a detective, or even a witness. It was a dog. The courtroom, once buzzing with murmurs, fell into complete silence. The evidence was undeniable, displayed for everyone to see. The tension in the air was suffocating, pressing down like an invisible force on every person in the room. Langley's face was drained of all color. His fingers twitched, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His once confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a vacant stare as he processed the walls closing in on him. His breathing grew shallow. Judge Holloway's voice sliced through the silence. "Mr. Langley, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Langley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was a man cornered, exposed in front of a courtroom filled with people who had once respected him. His sharp legal mind, the one that had helped him win countless cases, was now failing him. His eyes darted from face to face, his attorney, his colleagues, the jury, searching desperately for an escape, for a way out. But there was none. His own lawyer, Jonathan Reeves, looked defeated. He leaned in close, whispering, "They have you, Langley. There's no walking away from this. If you confess now, you might." "I didn't do anything." Langley suddenly burst out, his voice hoarse and wild. His outburst sent a jolt through the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel. "Control yourself, Mr. Langley," she ordered. But Langley was unraveling. His breathing became erratic, his hands trembling as he pointed an accusatory finger at the prosecutor. "This is a setup. That dog." He turned his gaze to Rex, who stood beside his handler, eyes locked on Langley, as if daring him to lie. "This is a joke. A dog doesn't decide my fate. I am an attorney, a respected—" "You were a respected attorney," Emily Carter interjected coldly, stepping forward. "Until you got greedy." She held up the printed documents retrieved from his briefcase. "Until you started accepting bribes. Until you thought no one would ever catch you." Langley clenched his jaw, his whole body shaking. Then his face crumbled. He let out a ragged breath, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. His hands, once defiant, now gripped his own hair as if trying to block out the reality. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and suddenly, he slammed his fists onto the table. "You don't understand." His voice cracked, teetering between anger and desperation. I had no choice. They made me do it. If I didn't play along, I would've." The courtroom gasped. Jonathan Reeves' eyes widened. "Who, Langley?" he asked cautiously. Langley let out a hollow, broken laugh, his head shaking. "It doesn't matter now. It's over." He looked up at the judge, eyes brimming with something between sorrow and fear. I have nothing left to say." The judge nodded solemnly. "Then, let's proceed." And just like that, Langley, once an untouchable force in the legal world, had finally fallen. 3 months earlier, in the dead of night, the law office of Randall and Langley was bathed in the dim glow of a single desk lamp. Papers were scattered across the mahogany desk, a half-empty whiskey glass trembling in Langley's hand. He wiped the sweat from his brow as he stared at the incriminating documents before him, bank statements, offshore accounts, and forged case files that proved his ties to organized crime. A sudden knock on the office door made him jolt. He quickly shoved the papers into his briefcase, forcing a calm expression as he opened the door. A tall, shadowy figure stepped inside. Vincent Morello, a well-known fixer for the underworld. "You're late," Morello muttered, closing the door behind him. His presence alone sent a shiver down Langley's spine. I needed more time," Langley stammered. Morello's lips curled into a smirk as he pulled a folder from his coat and tossed it onto the desk. "No more time, counselor. You're in too deep. You get that evidence buried, or you'll be the one going under." Langley swallowed hard, his fingers shaking as he flipped through the folder. Inside were photos, proof of tampered case files, altered testimonies, And worst of all, a surveillance image of himself accepting an envelope from a known crime boss. His voice was barely a whisper. This wasn't part of the deal. Morello chuckled, lighting a cigarette. Deals change. You got rich, we got what we needed. But if you screw this up, you'll wish the court was your biggest problem. Langley clenched his jaw, realizing he had no way out. The money, the bribes, the buried cases, it had all been easy at first. But now it was spiraling out of control. A loud bark shattered his thoughts. He looked down and saw the firm's K9, Rex, staring at him through the glass office window. The dog had always been sharp, trained to sense anxiety, deception, even fear. Langley exhaled shakily and turned back to Morello. I'll take care of it. Morello smirked. See that you do. As the door clicked shut behind him, Langley knew he had just made a decision that would lead him straight to the courtroom disaster awaiting him. The courtroom was silent. The air felt thick with anticipation as Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses and glanced over the room. The jury had returned, their expressions unreadable. Langley sat stiffly at the defense table, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the desk. His once confident smirk had faded into a ghostly pallor. The bailiff took a step forward. As the jury reached a verdict, the foreman, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, stood up and cleared his throat. We have, Your Honor. Judge Holloway gave a solemn nod. Please read the verdict. A deep breath. The entire room leaned in. In the case of the state versus Alexander Langley, on the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to tamper with evidence, guilty. On the charge of accessory to murder, guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Langley's face drained of color. His attorney whispered something in his ear, but he wasn't listening. His world was crashing down. The judge turned to Langley, his voice firm and unwavering. Mr. Langley, you have spent years twisting the law for your own gain, but justice has found you today. This court does not take such crimes lightly. Langley's breath hitched. Please, Your Honor, I was forced into this. His voice was hoarse, desperate. The judge's expression remained cold. You were given a choice, Mr. Langley, and you chose corruption, deception, and betrayal of the very system you swore to uphold. He turned his gaze to the jury. The people have spoken. A heavy pause. Then the sentence. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. A mixture of relief and satisfaction washed over the prosecution. Langley, on the other hand, slumped in his seat, his world officially over. As the bailiff approached to take him away, Rex, the K9 who had exposed the truth, let out a single sharp bark. It echoed through the courtroom, a final, fitting punctuation to the downfall of a man who had believed himself untouchable. As Langley was led away in handcuffs, the weight of the case lingered in the courtroom. Justice had been served, but the scars of the crime would remain. The victim's family sat in silent relief, their tears a mix of grief and closure. The officers, who had long suspected corruption in the system, felt a small victory. But they also knew this was just one battle in a war against deception. And then there was Rex, the K9 who had done what no human could, exposed the truth without bias, without fear, without corruption. His sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty had brought justice where it was almost lost. But how many other cases go unsolved? How many victims never get their moment of truth? This case reminds us of the fragile line between justice and deception. It forces us to ask, how often do we blindly trust those in power? How many secrets are buried, just waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? The truth has a way of surfacing, but only if we're willing to see it. Let this be a lesson. Justice is not just the responsibility of judges and lawyers. It is the duty of every citizen to question, to seek the truth, and to never allow corruption to go unchecked. And now we turn to you. What do you think about this case? Do you believe the justice system always prevails? Or do you think there are still hidden truths waiting to be exposed? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe in justice and truth, and in stories that shake the foundation of power, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next story we uncover might just change everything.